Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe-BrainSpotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm, and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. First off, I want to apologize for the sort of gap that you've had in episodes. There's been a lot of things going on between work, some travels. I also had a major loss in my family, so I've been sort of dealing with a bunch of that has meant my attention's been away from the podcast as opposed to work. But we are coming back, and we're going to be starting off this new, shall we say, section. Maybe I should just call this in season 2 of podcasts with one of our favorites and our continual supporters and having a Thera blurred out. But first, and of course, want to remind everyone that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only and does not constitute working with a mental health professional. Please seek out one in your area. But as I said, we're Thera blurting out, and Mercedes is here with me again. And because it's also time's precious for both of us today, we're here to talk about the movie that just came out recently, Sinners, by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B. Jordan. So very much enjoyed this. I've already gotten the soundtrack on my phone at the moment. So what about for you, Mercedes?
I absolutely love this movie. I have seen it twice already. I would like to see it again. I saw it in 70mm IMAX twice, both times.
Went for the big stuff.
Yeah, because I took the time to kind of look at what Ryan said about it, and I didn't look at too much of it because I didn't want to be spoiled, but I kind of was like, he said that you should watch it at this level just to get the full experience, and so overall, what I would say is that this movie is something that needs to be experienced and watched. I think everybody needs to watch it. And yes, it is a horror movie, but I also think that what it does is it really changes how we understand horror and what horror can be from another perspective. And I think that's something that has been needed so much in the horror conversation that I'm happy that Ryan Coogler and everyone that's involved really showcased what does horror look like.
Actually, by the time this comes out, I know there's a panel for the good friends of Jackson Elias is having their convention in June. And I know I'm going to be on a panel there talking about non-Western horror.
Yes.
Which there should be that should eventually show up on YouTube when they put them out there. But we're definitely talking about that concept of what does horror mean for somebody else?
Yes. And I think that's something that we've been seeing a renaissance of for especially Black and African American and African diasporic narratives. I actually just did a webinar for the TAGS Summit, Therapeutic Applied Gaming Summit, where I talked about surviving the nightmare and explored what does Black horror look like, not just in terms of entertainment, but how we can actually gain clinical insights and multicultural insights from exploring what does horror look like from the African American space, from the Black space, from the African diasporic space. I talked about some other films like Mia DaCosta's Candyman, right? These movies that showcase what does modern horror look like. Everyone is aware of Jordan Peele's trilogy of horror, but it doesn't go all the way back into the past. It says this is what horror is like for Black people now. It is the white suburban, perfect visage. It is the, people believing that they're just like us, right? They not like us, right? The movie, right? And then note, being that we're like this whole spectacle to people, but no one really cares about who we are. And I think Ryan Coogler is adding his narrative to this horror discussion that we're having, this horror renaissance that we're having, where we're starting to look at, especially for Black audiences, what's actually horrific for us. Are we scared of Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers? Yeah, like to some extent, those guys are scary, but we're really scared of the Ku Klux Klan that really terrorized our ancestors and our families, and to be honest, are still terrorizing Black people today. Right, we're scared of the idea that we're going to lose pieces of ourselves to a colonial idea because they covet us, but they don't really see us, right? And so these are the things that I think we need to see portrayed in our horror, so that way people can actually see we are human, right? These people that we have othered, these people that we have tried to erase from history, they really had to deal with horrific things, and it's not Chucky, and it's not Freddy Krueger. It's humans. It's other humans, right? And yes, in this movie, it's vampires, right? The metaphor, but really, there are other humans. There are other humans here that are trying to terrorize, and so I think that was a great exploration that Ryan and team did, and he wrote the script, right? So he directed it, he wrote it. So this was his story. This was his original idea, and I think we're really seeing how important it is to see other perspectives of horror, to humanize what people are living with and humanize what our ancestors live with.
Very true. And especially just looking at this movie, there were some, even though I was sitting there watching it, there were points where it's like, okay, it was the big scene that's coming to mind right now is that scene as they have realized what's going on, and the lead vampire is standing there singing the song, and everybody is dancing around him. And I'm just sort of looking at that as like, with full respect to Irish and Gaelic music, none of these people would be having that response.
No, and I think there is so many layers to what you just shared too, right? There's this community here that this Irish vampire is trying to create because his community was taken from him. And his ideal is to then build his community out of more oppression, right? Out of more kind of assimilation, if you will. Like the only way that the people could have community with him is to assimilate, to be like him, to come into what he was doing, right? Even the overarching, spoiler alert, right? Even the overarching theme of him wanting Sammy's music, right? Sammy's stories, right? This idea that I want what you have, but you have to become me to do it, I think talks about this long line of colonization that has happened where oftentimes groups of people have lost their community, have lost their identity in lieu of this idea of whiteness, in lieu of this idea of being colonial, in lieu of this idea of having this type of supremacy, right? I think we have to really pay attention to him creating that community of people who none of those Black Southern people knew that music and would have even been dancing to it. That he assimilated every single one of them to do what he wanted. I think there's a huge piece here where we're talking about just the long-reaching and the long-spanning influence of colonization, right? Even for this Irish guy, who we see as white, but he has his own culture and his own identity that's been taken from him too.
And that's one of those things that gets lost in the historical standpoint of there was a very large chunk of time where being Irish was considered no different than being Black.
Right. Think about that, right? Think about the idea of being part of a marginalized identity and having that community and understanding, okay, we're the same, but then having skin color and whiteness kind of persevere and take over, if you will. to that point where you don't even see that we are similar. We have been also colonized together. We have also had this. Why should I have to assimilate to be you for community? Right? It kind of makes me think of the scene that happened right before that, where they come to the juke joint to hang out, right? Smoke, Stack, everyone there, they were apprehensive because usually when white people come to hang out in black spaces, all hell breaks loose, literally and figuratively, right? And watching that interaction to me felt so tenuous because I think there's this moment where, yes, there's community, but there's also, we don't want to lose who we are to be in community with you. We don't want to assimilate. We don't want to become vampiric. We don't want to die in order to become part of this community. And if you pay attention to it, that's what he kept offering. Be a part of our community, be part of us. Come do what we want, right? Not we will be part of your community as you. And as I think about this even more, I think about just the trauma of the people in that juke joint, right? How much loss has happened there, how much they have banded together as a community because of that loss and that trauma, and how these vampires don't know that. Right? These kind of white people don't know that when they come in. And two of the people are actually clan members, right? That he actually brings there. And so there's this sense of, yes, he wants community, but at what cost to the people in the juke joint? These black people have already lost so much, right? Veterans, Smoke and Snack are veterans, you know. Delta Slim, who's lost friends and family. Annie literally has lost her child, right? And her partner. Right, all these people are there with us. Right, all these people are there with this sense of we have a community because we have lost and we grieve.
Mary's lost her mother,
and then you've got these other people coming in. Mary's just lost her mother. Thank you for bringing that in. Right, so there's this loss here, this desperation. This need to be a part of community, which I think is why she was so big on it. She wanted that community. She was very easy to. I feel the same way with Stack. I think there was this moment that he just wanted to be free of it all. Right. Versus the other people who really banded together by accepting that our grief, our stories make us who we are. We'll never be free of it, but we can learn how to be free here. Right? We can learn how to be free in that space. So there's so much that's coming up as I'm talking. Like I'm just thinking about all this.
Oh yeah, well there's a massive amount of symbolism just beyond what we just saw in that one little section. I mean, even to what was going on before it, and even to what we saw at the end too. So let's back up a little, and again, we're trying not to give too many spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but I figure by the time this comes out, most people will have seen it. We just even get into where we are at the start of this movie, which shows him driving up to the church and then stepping in. And we're also seeing some symbolism there in how the black church deals with trauma.
Yes. I love that symbolism too, because that's the only place he knows to go after something like that, right? And for us as the audience, we don't know what's happened yet. But for Sammy, he's gone through the most traumatic night of his life pretty much at that point, and just goes home. He just goes back home. And for him, after a night like that, seeing the devil, the literal devil, fighting the literal devil, his first brain is just to go back home, church, right? But then, like you said, once he gets there, his dad tells him to get rid of that devil music. But that was the thing that saved him. If he didn't have that, he wouldn't actually have been saved. And I feel like there's that pull sometimes with our ancestry that I think Ryan was trying to show us, that a lot of our roots are in these spiritual practices like hoodoo, which is what Annie was practicing in the film, right? But even voodoo, so voodoo, just for those who are listening, has a more Christian space to it. So it was what happened with the African folks who came here during the transatlantic slave trade. Hoodoo became a way to honor their African spirituality while being assimilated into the Christian spirituality that was happening at the time, right? And so that hoodoo became a real essence of us honoring our African spirituality still here on this continent, in this country. And so when you watch people practice that, you realize that for many Black people, we've been torn away from that history and that understanding. Christianity tended to demonize anything that did not agree with it. And so imagine all of our ancestors for years underneath the transatlantic slave trade, having to assimilate into Christianity, having these little small pockets of people who were still practicing, but realizing that if I didn't assimilate into Christianity, I could be hurt. I could lose my life, right? And so there's this huge, I think, spiritual trauma within, especially the African American community, that we don't think about a lot. And I think Ryan gave us a moment just to think about how has Christianity been a trauma to our community, and how can we get back to our spirituality, what really makes us human, not this distilled kind of colonial understanding of spirituality. It's kind of how I saw some of that.
Well, there's also the way, and as you're describing it and thinking about it, is like, and I know this is going to can be considered controversial. How is the church not another vampire?
Oof, I love it. Yes, right? Feeding off of that loyalty, feeding off of that need. And I even sometimes would even explore how power shifts, that for the Black people who assimilated into Christianity, they also get to become leaders of their community, right? And that level of power feels very exciting to have, right? And so then you become almost a product of the thing that oppressed you, right? Because you want that power, almost, right? And I think when we're looking at Sammy's dad, I think, like Smoke and Stack said early on, he doesn't hit you, he seems to be a good man. I think even at one point, Stack told Sammy, go back to your church. Just be a good church person. Don't do what we're doing.
Make the church music.
I think, again, it just shows that embedded. Right. It just shows how embedded that type of ideology is, that what Smoke and Stack were doing to Stack was bad, right? Playing this old blues music, all this devil music. He had internalized that. He also had internalized that he was always going to be a bad person because of what happened with his dad and who his dad was in the community and things like that. And so there's this internalization of, I'm bad, my humanity is bad, the music of my people is bad, the spirituality of my people is bad, and the white church, white God is what's good. And if I can get towards him, I'll be more pure, I'll be more better. I think a lot of times what we're seeing in this narrative is how that's how that's become interwoven with our narrative as African Americans, especially, that we have to really look at why did our ancestors even accept Christianity? What did they benefit from, if anything? And why do we hold on to it? What I remember when I grew up Christian, Baptist Christian faith. And when I asked my mom about some of this stuff, she said something to me, and she was my grandmother, by the way, so there's a few generations between her and I. She was born in 1944. I was born in 1985, just to give you some understanding of perspective of her mindset. And what she said to me is that our ancestors, this is her idea, accepted God into their life so that way they could find the salvation to free themselves. And at the time, it made sense. Okay, they accepted God so God could help them free themselves from enslavement. Made sense. As I started to get older and question faith, spirituality, and what it really was, I realized that Christianity became a way for enslavers to oppress and control, right? Especially by withholding the ability to even read the Bible to see what it says. This idea of using scripture as power. I'm the master as God intended it, and you are the servant as God intended it. Once you realize that these are some of the roots of Christianity and why it was forced upon us, it makes you question it. It doesn't mean you can't love God or even look for a relationship with God or Jesus. I'm not saying that, but I think definitely questioning what happened to this whole community of people who came to America with spirituality, with an understanding of their gods and their spirits and their ancestors. Why was that ripped from them and then in that place given somebody else's God? I think we need to question that more and do exactly what you said, see how vampiric that was, see how they sucked the life out of people by withholding our own spirituality and taking that away from us.
So many levels in this movie. So many levels. I mean, even to that standpoint, too. I mean, you have also seen who were the folks who lived on essentially the plantation versus who are the folks who lived in the town. And just the differences in their lives and how they were dealing with situations and such versus those. Because the juke joint was a place where all of those mixed. Yes. Everyone had a need to be in a different state.
Yes. What I like about this, actually, and I have to say this because, again, giving Ryan and his team props for depicting this era of time. What we often get in African American Black cinema is slavery, enslavement, the actual time of it, or the time after that, Harlem Renaissance and everything after that, right? It's really hard to talk about that really horrible period after enslavement where Black people were not really a part of society, but we were let off into society. What I often tell people about the sharecropping era is what happened to the Black people who were here is that slavery was abolished legally, but the country had no structure for all of these new people who were now seen as human, who were now able to live and work and be a part of a society that never envisioned them to be a part of that society. And so sharecropping became a really horrific way for Black people to maintain a livelihood for themselves, but still being seen as less than or not good enough to have things. And so for those of you who might not know, and we'll go into this movie trying to understand what happened, the sharecropping era happened from like the end of the Civil War, the end of the transatlantic slave trade, all the way to about the 40s. So it actually went through some of the Harlem Renaissance. And what happened for Black people is that they were not allowed to have their own land. However, they were able to borrow land or share land with plantation owners who could no longer hold them as legal property, but could now, so to speak, have a contract with them. I say contract with air quotes because this wasn't really a system. It was just that Black people who needed to be able to make a life for themselves needed to be able to purchase land so they can build. Just so you know, that land was usually the worst land on the plantation, the land that had the hardest time being tilled and grown on. It became really exploitive where if the sharecroppers were able to make a profit and able to make certain things off of it, then those landowners would take more from them and take more profit from them or take more shares from them. And so it became a real economic neo-slavery, so to speak, if I wanted to give a term to it. It became kind of like the new enslavement because while Black people were legally free and seen as legally human, so to speak, and I say all this with air quotes for that time period, they were still in a level of enslavement where they couldn't own things on their own. Most of what they produced wasn't given to them. And as you see in centers, they don't even get real currency. They got wooden currency that could only be used within the plantation economy. So if they tried to go outside of that, they didn't actually have real currency or real capital to use, right? And so sharecropping is one of those eras where I think we need to shed more light on the fact that, yes, slavery was abolished at that time, but Black people were not able to be a part of society in a way that allowed us to forwardly advance and progress ourselves for a really long time. And like I said, this went all the way to the 1940s. And I just said that the woman who raised me was born in 1944. Like, this isn't ancient history. This is right around the corner from us and our ancestors and the people who
Which becomes one of the most pivotal conversations that they have in the movie where they're talking about, here's the plantation dollars, here's the real money dollars. Which then causes then for Mary to go and Mary to make a choice in trying to support this that then opens the door.
Yeah. And I think that's something else to talk about here too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of think pieces on Mary. There's going to be a lot of think pieces on that idea of the one Black rule because Mary shares earlier that her grandfather is Black, so she was raised this way, so that way her family, or I think something like that, her mother. So I forget exactly how her genealogy is discussed, but we find out that she has Black people in her heritage. We find out that her mom, who raised her, was Black as well, and raised Smoke and Stack, and so she's family. But it also asks us to question: how do we determine someone's Blackness? How do we determine someone's heritage? Right? Even in that, though, her ability to pass, her ability to walk between both worlds becomes a metaphor because she becomes a vampire. And so she literally is, at that point, walking between two worlds. It's a very interesting discussion because I think oftentimes in fantasy lore, vampirism is really a metaphor for that person who can walk between both worlds, that person who kind of can pass, if you will, for human and human and kind of be there. Well, I think that's the discussion that's being had with Mary, with Haley Steinfeld's character, right? That as a fairer skinned Black person, or someone who identifies as Black but is fairer, she's able to navigate both of those worlds, sometimes to their benefit, but it seems in the movie to their detriment in this space, that ability to walk both back.
And especially once she becomes a vampire, how quickly she's really ready to basically feed them all to that cause. Which I know there are some would say it's about that aspect of dealing with the colorism that happens in our group, dealing about also with the cost of power. But again, there's a few other layers to that. And it also comes back to what we saw with this vampire, and at least how this mechanism of vampirism worked, which basically became, he's the central head. No one really had will.
Yeah. And that's something that I noticed too, that because he was the main guy, they all felt his pain, right? He kind of all made them an extension of himself. I continue to sit with how Remy's vampire being the lead guy is kind of a really interesting metaphor for assimilation. That once they all got bit by him, they became more like him. They began to go for his cause and want to do what he wanted to do and build that community around him.
I would also take it even another step further, too, is that how is it also not an example of narcissism?
Yeah, buddy. I've got the answers all for me. I want the stories. I'll disseminate who gets what. Yeah.
But either way, you're an extension of me. You don't have your own will. You don't have your own choices. I want into this structure, so everybody needs to get into this structure because I wanted Sammy.
And then how he did that, how he got everybody. He convinced everybody, right? One by one. And listen, even when he would start to talk about things, this is what it's about, this is what it is. We haven't even talked about, what's their names? The Chinese.
Oh, Bo and
I'm thinking about them and how they were used. Yes, right? How they were used as well, right? Oftentimes we forget that our Asian American folks have also been in an oppressive space in America, especially in North America. And in the South, right, it even taught me a little bit more. Brian brought me some history that I had an inkling of, but didn't have the depth of, about how Chinese immigrants were a part of our community in the South. Because, like you said, immigrant, Black, it's all marginalized, right? And at that time, white was the top and everybody else was underneath. So there was this community here that I think Ryan shows us. There was a community here that this white vampire came in and pulled apart immediately. He picked poor Robin, that song is right there in my head. He really came in and picked that community apart, what I'm saying, with these ideas of him being the leader, like you said, him being the one who can do everything. Come into my community, give me your stuff. I'll take it and give it back to you the way it's supposed to be. Right? I'm the one who needs to be.
Or the constant theme of, can't we have all fellowship? It's like, fellowship according to what definition? What's the operational definition?
Oof. Which I think is a common thing. Can't we all just get along? But to whose detriment and whose benefit? Once we all come together, who loses their voice? Who gets silenced? Right? When we come together. And oftentimes, when we think about colonialism, it's the person who wins who gets to say the story. It's the victor who writes the story there. And so for Remy, he would have been the victor. If everyone had gotten turned into vampires that night, he would have written the stories. He would have told them what happened that night. And I think that is the largest influence of colonialism, that whoever wins, they set the tone for everybody else, and everybody else has to come under.
But also that fundamental aspect of his community is not sustainable.
At all.
Which also is a message about Victor. How long is that sustainable? Which, again, even why I bring it back to the standpoint of narcissism, that standpoint of how long is the narcissist going to be sustainable in being able to do what they're doing before they're going to meet those people who will put down and hold them accountable, or will never deal with them at all, want no relationship with them. They immediately create isolation.
also one other aspect of narcissism that I think is often misread because of how quick it happens is how vampiric people are. So as I start noticing that I'm losing my community, people are starting to see it. I sink my teeth in other people. I get other people. Oh, Mercedes is lying. She's not telling the truth of me. And so now I'm sinking my teeth into other people. Now I'm trying to get more supply. Right now I need more blood, metaphorically, so to speak, right? And I feel like that's what ends up happening to people like that. It's not sustainable. So when people start to hold you accountable, when people start to push back, you have to go find other victims, right, to get them in on what you're doing. And I feel like that's what Remick does. When one person does it, he goes and gets someone else. Oh, you're not going to listen? Okay, let me go find someone else. Right? And then he fights them, and then they come back to the door and knock on right? It's like, you're right. I'm really feeling into this metaphor of narcissism because I think that's what ends up happening. If you're not going to listen to me, fine. I'll just find someone.
Right. The quote-unquote flying monkeys.
Right. I'll find my flying monkeys. I'll bite them. Right. And now they're part of my community. Which happened with Smoke and Stack. Like, think about Stack and how close he and his brother was. But the minute Remick bit him, pulled that.
Mary, actually. But again, shall we say, the metaphor of infection goes through.
Right. It goes through. It makes people. I remember the scene where after she comes back, she has lost all of that apprehension and self-doubt of whether she should be in the space and who she is and all that grief she had, and she just comes right right? I feel like that's very reminiscent of what kind of that white supremacist idea is, that I now have control. I can do whatever I want. I can walk in. I can infect whoever I want. I can get them to be on my side, right? No matter what. That preying on people's insecurities, that preying on people's need for community and love, right? Think about how Mary knew Stack very well, right? And now all the other vampires would know him too, right? So when she goes in there to talk to him, she already knows what his vulnerabilities are. She already knows where his insecurities are. Right? That's how we infiltrate, and I think that's how that stuff infiltrates.
Well, and even more, we see that too. Once Remick has gotten Bo on his side, when he tries to go after Anna, and I'm blanking on her name, but then he's speaking flawless Chinese to her.
That was so creepy to me, because that's what that is, that level of invasion, right?
And that standpoint that, oh yeah, you guys all now get to know what he knows, he gets to know what you know, but who's actually using that knowledge?
And how are they
Which is that standpoint of what does it mean to seduce to get through the door?
Oof. Grace.
That's right. But
no, I love what you just said though. That part of like, how do you use that information to get in the door?
Right, because I think that's one of the biggest things about which we also just look at the classic history about the vampire. For them to get to their why that the vampire is considered one of the most dangerous of all the various mythic monsters is because they can pass as human, they can walk up to you, and they can get close to you.
Yes, they can.
Versus the werewolf, at some point he's going to be howling, and you're going to lock the doors. Versus they've come to the door, they're wearing the face, they're easy to cut. You're easy to let them in.
Yes. And I think there's this part as, when they first come, everyone's apprehensive. They don't know that they're vampires yet. They're responding to their likeness. And Remick even says, oh, man, it's because we're like this. Is that what that's about? I think when you said, how do they use that information to get in? How did he use that information? Right? This information that racism is very big in the South right now, right? Oh, man, we just want to get along, using that language of community, right? Using that language of, let's just be together, man. We just want to play music, right? Trying to really use that language of community and love in a way that has nothing to do with community and love to get in. Right? And I think when you look at that and how vampires have to be invited in, I think that's a very huge metaphor for what do we invite? Right? When people start to say things to us, oh, I want to love, go back to narcissists. Narcissists are very good at telling you what you want. So they can get in, right? Yeah, I love you. Yeah, you're the best. Oh, this is all, I'm here forever because they need to get in the door. Well, that's what these vampires are doing. Community, love. We all here for a little bit of music just like y'all are. Right? We all here for the same thing, and you realize they're not there for the same thing at all. But they're using this lure, if you will. They're trying to lure these folks in. But then you have these Black people who are here who know all of that. They know all the jive. They know all the lies that people say because they see this from a different perspective. It's not that these are just some poor white people who just want to hang out with us for the night. These are people who could be a threat to us, right? And past that scene, I think it was Stack who says that to him. He says, yeah, they want to hang out. Or maybe it was
Smoke,
who says, yeah, they want to hang out, but what if somebody looks at one of the women too long? What if somebody actually pushes them, right? So they were already thinking about not vampirism, but just white people in our space could be really detrimental to our safety, right? Anything could go off and then we're unsafe immediately, right? And so I think there's something to be said there about how they were using that community idea to get in the door, but then the Black people there knew, no, if they're in our space, there's no more community. If they're in our space, it's no more safe.
Yeah, because it was a conversation between Smoke and Stack that we're having that.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful place there. Why don't we go ahead and just pause for a moment, and we'll come back in our second half to talk about some of the other components other than just this, because, there's definitely some character developments with some of the other characters as well. But stay tuned. We're going to be back here on Untying Knots to talk about Sinners.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Discover the power of music to heal and uplift. Introducing NeuroVibe, where rhythm meets recovery. NeuroVibe fuses ambient music textures with rhythmic layers to create music that goes beyond relaxation. It's crafted to resonate deeply, perfect for relaxation, self-reflection, or therapeutic sessions. NeuroVibe invites you to connect with your inner self through immersive sound. Explore NeuroVibe today on SoundCloud and experience the transformative power of music. Tune in, find your vibe, and discover what NeuroVibe can do for you. For more information, check out NeuroVibe on SoundCloud today at soundcloud.com/NeuroVibe-brainspotting. NeuroVibe is intended for general wellness and relaxation purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Explore NeuroVibe now on SoundCloud. Dive in, find your rhythm, and feel better with NeuroVibe.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with Mercedes Samudio, Dr. Samudio, and we're having our therapy blurred out talking about Sinners, which we've both recently seen, both very much love, and there's so many layers to this movie. I know we're not going to get to everything in our podcast tonight, but we're going to get enough to touch on it. Some of the things that I know I was also looking at in some of the responses to it was also the aspect of the choices in the love interests. And what that's also talking about, culture and image and acceptability, and even just the history that exists between the two love interests, too.
Yeah. I think that is, for someone who often talks about representation in the media, it is so beautiful to see someone like Rumi Masoka, who I have loved for years, like since Love Black Country, since Loki, since everything that she's been in. She was in His House, which is another horror movie. I think that's just kind of her genre. But seeing her as a full-figured, dark-skinned Black woman with natural hair who practices spirituality, hoodoo, right? Even to have her give the backstory of having child loss and having that grief be a part of her, it just made her such a full person. And when we're looking at the representation of women who usually get that role, right? We think of, oh, they have to be the mammy, or they have to be the nurse, or they have to be the nanny, or the help. And to see her be a full-fledged woman, right? Who loves, who's scared, right? She has knowledge, real knowledge. Even watching her compassion for taking the plantation money that the kids give her when they come to her shop and letting him know that this is important to these people. These people work hard for their money, right? Seeing her be a part of the community this way, I think, becomes this understanding of representation that people who watch this movie won't hit them right away, but you'll start to notice that now you've seen another representation of a full-figured, full-bodied Black woman, dark skin, natural hair, who isn't playing one of the stereotypical roles that normally is offered to someone like that makes sense.
As well as that standpoint of just the power that she has. And just on a side note, as I was watching the mid-credit scenes and so forth, I was watching the credits roll by, and it's like, wait a minute, I recognize that name, and I'm going to shout out to episode 96 of the podcast with Yvonne Chostros, who was the hoodoo consultant on the movie. So we have one here. I'm trying to set things up to talk with her again soon. So that standpoint of that, because we talked about hoodoo as well earlier, but that just the sense of the power that she had in recognizing what was giving them a fighting chance.
And that she was the biggest vocal person there, that once everyone realized what they were dealing with, she was the one to come to that conclusion, and she was the one to kind of lead everyone to eat the garlic, and get ready with the stakes and to have some of that. I even appreciated her figuring out the difference between the hate and the vampire, because at first she thought, well, it's definitely not alive, so it's dead, right? But then to actually have her knowledge help her, I'm going to use Brain's body language, narrow the frame, right? So that way she actually figured out that it was actually a vampire that they were dealing with. I just love that she got to be that voice. She got to be the one to figure things out, and everyone listened to her. Everyone followed her lead. And again, that's more representation of having someone who looks this way, who normally doesn't get this level of characterization, have so much screen time, have so much of the screen focused on her knowledge, her understanding, her power, her spirituality. I think is going to be something that we see reverberate because of that.
Very much so. And then there's also the role that Perline, as well as Delroy Lindo's character as well.
Yes, Delroy Lindo. Yes, Delta.
Yeah, those two were also even though Perline sort of came in later in the aspects of it, they still had such an impact, especially in that scene where they have to eat the garlic.
Yes. I love her too. Her name is Jamie Lawson, the actress who plays Perline, and I like her too for a lot of reasons. One of my personal things that I've always appreciated is a messy Black woman, a woman who gets to be Black, who gets to be a bit of a mess, who doesn't always make the right decisions, but still you can see her humanity. And with Perline, I saw this woman who was confined to her time. Being a Black woman who was married was something that was good. You did the right thing. Even watching Stack try to marry off to make sure she's settled and good, that was what women were confined to. If you weren't married, then you weren't a woman. If you were out here floating around doing all this stuff, so for someone like Perline to take a night to say, you know what, I'm going to shed that good girl image. Sinners, right? The movie's called Sinners, right? But I like this idea that she came, she was there, she understood, she made a decision. She wasn't there like, I don't know why I'm here. She told him straight up her husband was not coming tonight. She was here. They made love, right? Like she was a full-bodied human being. And then she perished. right? Along with people, not because she was bad, but because she was in the space. She fought just like everybody else for her community, right? For the people who loved her. She knew in her final moments they were here for Sammy. He needed to go. She could sacrifice that. And I feel like that full story arc in a 2-hour movie for a dark-skinned Black woman, right, also felt really beautiful, right? It also felt really alive, right? They don't need to be perfect. People don't need to be perfect to have full lives. People don't have to always make the right decisions to have full lives. And to be honest with you, to look at a woman like Perlene, who was confined to meant to be a woman at that time, to make an intentional decision to be free for a night, I loved it. I loved seeing that level of representation. And then Sammy names his club Perlene's, right? Her sacrifice, right? And I thought that was a beautiful tribute to her and her desire to be free that night. Everybody's desire to be free.
And the definition of that freedom is going to be different for every person. And sometimes that freedom does mean there are people who will side with the other side.
Because sometimes that's how we get free. It's such an interesting conversation. I think one of the things, and you said it, we won't get to everything here, but I think what Ryan did with this movie and this script was he asked us to look at humans, and the humans that he gave us were a full class of these were full-bodied humans. Smoke, Stack, and I have to say, I'm going to shout this out. Michael B. Jordan has really become our generation's amazing actor, because what he did with both of these characters, both of these men felt like separate humans, right? Like there was separate goals and separate dreams and separate ambitions and separate lovers. And like, it was Michael B. Jordan playing two different characters. And so even in that, I think you find that there's all this humanity in each and every one of these people who for one night wanted to be free. They all ended up at the juke joint, and they had to deal with whatever ended up coming up there. But that humanity is something that I really appreciate, and I am happy that he gave us that human original story through a cast of Black people. Right? So you're going to see humans, but they're going to be Black people, and you're going to see what it means, like we said at the beginning. What does horror mean for these people? What does horror mean for people in the South during the sharecropping era? What is horror to them? That is beautiful to me, because that's what makes us human. What scares us? What's our biggest fear? Is our biggest fear a vampire coming to my juke joint, or is my biggest fear the Klansmen who are going to come and burn it down the next morning? Who's the scarier threat?
Well, and we're not going to get into what happens with them, but I do want to go back to that aspect of when Smoke is there by himself, trying to roll that cigarette, and you can see the trauma and the way the nervous system is keeping him from having that precise control to make that a cigarette. But the memories he flashes back to, the memories of the night before, as the community came together to make the juke joint.
Yeah, and he and his brother did that together. They did that through all the stuff they went through the abuse of their dad, right? Through the war. Right, through the Chicago antics, through that night, right? They got all the way back home, and for one night, I think someone actually says that for one night they were free, right? And I agree with you for that, all of that. I read something the other day about it where they were even talking about some of those tremors were about his PTSD too, because he could never roll his own cigarettes even before then. His brother always rolled anyway, right? Because from the war he couldn't do it. Right? He couldn't do it. And so that was something that I thought was really subtle, that when I go watch it again, I'm going to pay attention to it, because What's-His-Face always gave him a cigarette. He always wrote it for him. I remember when it happened in the scene after they were talking about the money and how much money they were going to lose and how they just had to leave the plantation alone and just let the people pay for one night and they try to recoup it later after they get through all that. And he says, okay. He says, man, I need a cigarette. His brother says, coming right up. And he wrote it. So I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about it now that all of that moment is for him not just trying to roll a cigarette, it's that he's lost so much. Not just the ability to roll it, but his right-hand person, the person who literally asked him his cigarette. You know?
And that had that steadiness to it. And it even comes back to the relationship between these two identical brothers of who got, and again, which one of them was the one getting the abuse from their father and who wasn't.
Yeah. I love that they both got their own freedom. So I think about Smoke being able to be with his family at the end, right? He and Annie and his daughter, that was his freedom. But then Stack finally got to live. He got to live his whole life as a vampire, right? And I love, y'all are going to be so mad because we're spoiling it, but I love at the end when he says, when we find out how he ended up leaving that night. He said, man, I'm sorry, you couldn't do it. He said, no, you always took care of me. You've been taking care of me the whole time we've been together. Those little nods to their relationship to me, I think is what makes this movie so human. That, at this end, we're dealing with vampires and we're dealing with the dirt, the deep south and sharecropping and the remnants of slavery, but we're also dealing with these two brothers who have had each other's back on all this stuff. And now this was the thing that was finally going to separate them. And in that separation, they could finally grieve. They could finally release.
And
they could finally actually just...
And they could have their own identities.
Boom. Ooh, I like that pairing. Yeah, they finally got to be
their own individuals.
Yeah.
And that's definitely an important part of all of this. And again, there's so many different layers. We weren't going to be able to hit everything. I know we've hit some big ones, especially for us. I mean, there's still more we could talk again about the relationship, especially with Sammy and the music, which I'm just going to bring this last bit here about the scene when he's singing and we get to see how everyone's being affected, the aspect of the ancestors, not just the ancestors of the past, but the ancestors of the future. And it's not just Sammy's, it's everyone that's in that room's ancestors are called.
Yeah. Even I loved when you saw when Bo and Grace started dancing, their ancestors showed up. Right? Their Chinese ancestors showed up. I just love that. The last time I saw it, I actually even noticed the girls twerking in the kitchen. And me and my husband talked about that because that's where the women the women danced and talked and were themselves. And so I love that the idea that twerking, that type of dance that sometimes gets vilified. I love that Ryan brought that in because that's how women dance. Women share their bodies this way and enjoy moving their hips in this way because this is us. This is us at our most raw. And I just love that scene too. We could do a whole podcast. And all that symbolism there because I think it was so amazing. Oh yeah,
I know. There was one particular figure that showed up there, which I'm going to save for the conversation with Irene. Yes. But it's just like the moment I saw that, it's like, oh fuck, that spirit showed up. It's like, oh, that's power.
I hope you do get to do that episode because I would love to listen to what she talks about because her being consultant. I just love that he did that too. I love that he didn't just say, I know everything about hoodoo. He brought people in to really make sure that it was represented in a way that was healthy. And because when people watch this, they're going to take this away and say, is this what hoodoo is? And they're going to say, yes, this is what it is. I really appreciate it.
Not a single hex or bad mojo is done anywhere in all of that. So,
thanks.
Exactly. Well, we should be wrapping up. I want to thank you again for having a chance to talk about this because I know as soon as I saw that, I remembered it and it was like, okay, I got to check to see if Mercedes is going to go see this. And it's like, okay, we need to do a video. For
sure.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you as always. So thank you folks for listening and we're going to be back with some more episodes which I'm working on trying to get them back in a regular cadence as well. So take care, stay tuned. Definitely watch Sinners. Definitely get the music. And we'll be back for more to talk with. So, be well, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.